welcome to the Earthkeepers podcast. This podcast is for people who seek new and better ways to love and care for the earth. It's a podcast for anyone who is deeply concerned about the harm being done to the environment on a local and global level. It's a podcast that builds community and connection between people of like heart and mind, people who believe that earth care should be integrated into every aspect of life, and for many in the Earthkeepers community, that includes our spiritual lives. Welcome, friends, to the Earthkeepers podcast. Hey friends, Forrest here. As you might have gathered from my comments in recent episodes, I have, in addition to my work with Circlewood, also taken a position as the director of the Pacific Rim Institute for Environmental Stewardship on Whidbey Island, which is off the coast of Washington State. While I hope to tell you more about PRI in later episodes, I want to focus now on one of our partner organizations. Now, historically, Pacific Rim Institute has worked with an organization called the Au Sable Institute to serve undergraduate students whose vocational interests lie in some form of earthkeeping work. On the day of this episode's release, in fact, the newest cohort of students are gathering at PRI for their first day of class. In light of that occasion, I thought it might be interesting to hear about the work of Au Sable. And to do that, we'll be talking to Au Sable's executive director, Jon Terry, as well as two Au Sable alumni, Sarah and Carson. We'll start with you, though, Jon. I'm glad you could join me on the podcast, and would love it if you could start us off with a bit of context information regarding Au Sable.
It's great to be here. Thanks for showing an interest in our work. I'm the executive director of the Au Sable Institute. We're located in northern Michigan. Our mission is to inspire and educate people to serve, protect, and restore God's earth. And we do that primarily through three programs. One is a college program where we serve college students in the summer. We have a K-12 environmental education program where we serve local public and private schools in environmental ed. And we also have a community engagement program, where we are committed to doing habitat restoration projects throughout northern Michigan.
And of course, you also have the secondary campus on the West Coast, and those students are gathering at Pacific Rim Institute, where I work. So, Jon, can you tell us a bit about Au Sable and what that name means and how the organization started?
The Au Sable Institute, we were founded about 40 years ago. Au Sable is a French word. I believe it means river of sand or at the sand. Our campus here in northern Michigan, we call this our Great Lakes campus. We're about 10 miles from the headwaters of the Au Sable River. When we were originally started 40 years ago, it was started by a man named Harold Snyder. He was a professor of biology at Taylor University. Taylor's in northern Indiana. He wanted to start a camp for kids, primarily so that they could learn more about God by studying his creation. The students that he recruited to be camp counselors were all biology students from Taylor University, and he quickly realized that the college students were actually getting as much or more out of their experience than the kids were. And he just realized that these biology students, that they were learning at a much deeper level, being out in the created world, and that hands-on learning was better than classroom learning in a lot of ways. We still have programs that serve young students, local K-12 students. But during the summer, our primary mission is to serve college students. And we're a field station, like an environmental field station for over 50 Christian colleges throughout the U.S. and Canada.
So I would imagine that while on the one hand, you're serving colleges and students by helping them to gain credit through hands-on experience, there's probably also a formational element to their time at Au Sable. It just seems to me when you talk about God and helping them to perceive God and nature that you're also talking about changing hearts. How does that work?
So when students come here, a big theme that we hear is the sense of community that's here, but the formative side and forming community is just as big. We say that kind of our three distinctives here are expert professors that integrate faith into the curriculum, hands-on learning, you're out in the field, at least 50% of classes have to be outside, And then the third distinctive is just this community of friends. And all these students who go to these small Christian colleges, a lot of them don't feel like they have fit in with their Christian community because of their care for the earth, their concern for the natural environment. They feel like a misfit in the Christian world and in their upbringing, their church, and their family. And so when they come here to be surrounded by other people who share their same passion for the created world, that their care for the environment is just a natural extension of their faith, and to be surrounded by other people like that is really transformative.
How do you prepare them to actually go back home then? How do you prepare them to have hope in the face of being a misfit, have hope in the face of a community around them that isn't supporting their concerns?
That's really hard. And a lot of it is just getting encouragement that there are other Christians out there that care about God's earth.
Well, on that note, let's go ahead and have a listen to the reflections of two people whose lives were changed by the Au Sable Summer Program, which in their case was the program at the Michigan campus. This is Sarah and Carson, and I should note that while they were students when we had this conversation, both of them have since graduated. Well, welcome, Sarah, Carson. I'm wondering if you could orient our listeners today by letting us know what it is you do day to day.
So I am a senior at Olivet Nazarene University in Kankakee, Illinois. It's about an hour south of Chicago. I'm an environmental science major, so I spend a lot of my time in our science building. I do a lot of lab work, and we have an animal care room that we facilitate, and I'm one of the managers for that. So I spend a lot of time, running around doing that.
Great. And Carson, how about you?
I'm a senior general biology student at Cedarville University in Cedarville, Ohio. I'm originally from South Dakota, so it's a bit of a hike, but I love it here. I spend most of my time, like Sarah, also in the lab, finishing credits up for my degree. I'm going for Bachelor's of Science in biology, and then I actually am a lab assistant for one of the professors on staff here, so I just got off a 3-hour shift for that. So he's an entomologist, and so I do a lot of work with insects and things like that.
Great. So tell us a bit about your aspirations in the realm of earth care. You're both studying creation care-esque topics, and I'm wondering where you hope that's going to lead, vocationally speaking. Sarah?
So I am in school in Illinois, but my hometown is Houston, Texas. So I grew up on the coast, and I have a very strong connection to that. And through my studies, through different experiences and exposures that I've had, I think it would be really cool to work something related to water management, water solutions, waste management, things regarding, the maintenance and sustainability of our water resources, whether that is, again, along the coastline in the Gulf of Mexico, or if that looks like something else. I've recently, over the past couple of years, grown a love for the Great Lakes since I've been able to see them and live around them. So I'm hoping to do something along those lines.
How about you, Carson?
Yeah, so I'm hoping to go into wildlife biology. So for my biology degree I'm doing right now, I'm emphasizing a lot in ecology and environment, specifically how plants and animals interact with the environment. So my hopes are, once I graduate here in May, go back home to South Dakota and hopefully get a wildlife technician job. Just whatever it is, I'm not too picky at this point. But I do hope to go to graduate school for a master's in wildlife biology, hopefully work for some sort of government agency. I grew up in an area with lots of animals, an outdoor family, and I just grew to have a real love and appreciation for animals and how they interact with humanity and the environment. So learning to treat them with respect and how to properly care for and manage their populations is why I want to go into that.
I want to pick up on that comment that you made about respect and understanding really that animals are, part of the bigger context in which we live and are deserving of respect. I'm wondering if you could, Carson, tell us more about some of the influences as you were growing up. What is it that led you to this place of wanting to be someone who cares for the earth?
Yeah, so like I said before, my family was pretty outdoors oriented. I grew up camping, tent camping specifically, hiking. My father hunts and fishes, and so I also picked up those from him. And just the daily interaction with the environment. I was actually homeschooled, so being able to take a break from school and go walk around outside. We lived on a forested property of a couple acres, so we'd see turkeys and deer, in our backyard. And since, as long as I can remember, I've always really cared about that, and that love for animals was really nurtured by my father and mother. Just, my dad also has a biology degree. I point back to him and my mom for why I'm at where I am now. I think it's really important. It's something a lot of people don't think about. Even when people talk about the environment in general, a lot of times they're speaking for the landscape, even plants in general. And I think it's important we keep animals in as much of the context as we can.
Yeah, absolutely. What about you, Sarah? If you think back to the way that you grew up, what were some of the influences that moved you into this vocation of being someone who cares for the environment?
Well, I kind of grew up on the other end of how Carson grew up. I grew up in the city, didn't go out a lot. My family didn't do trips out camping or out to any parks or things like that. I always grew up with a love and fascination with wildlife, mostly with the diversity of it and how there are so many specific, amazing adaptations that creatures have to fill their part in the ecosystem. And I grew up really appreciating that. And I kind of hand in hand with that, like I said, I grew up along the coast, and my dad worked in oil and gas. And so when the Deepwater Horizon spill happened, I kind of I picked up on a lot of what my dad would be talking about with his coworkers, or things that he would be reading or looking at, and hearing a lot about that. That really affected me because I remember the coast and the beaches before that happened versus after that happened, and the change that occurred. And even when it came to just walking along the shoreline, what you see now is different than what you saw then. And with that fascination with wildlife coming from the diversity and their unique role in creation, seeing that destroyed because of an accident, because of something that businesses go into these things knowing they're possible, doing what they can to avoid it, but it's still possible. And when it does happen, it's devastating, and it ruins that diversity, and it completely tanks it. And so I remember seeing that and thinking that was where my heart was, that was where my passion was. And it took me a while to get to exactly what I wanted to do. When I came into college, I was zoology because I was fascinated with wildlife, but my passion for it wasn't in caring for the animals themselves. It was in caring for what sustains them. Mm-hmm. And so for me, that came back to water and the role that it plays in our lives, the role that it plays in creation's life.
So both of you were Au Sable students. I'm hoping that you can tell us about that experience.
One of the biggest things that set Au Sable apart for me was the passion that was shown by our professors and by the staff that were there, because it really affected the approach that I took to my studies and to the experiences that I was having. It would have been very easy for me to go up there and say, okay, I'm taking these classes for credit. I just need to get these written off so I can graduate. It's cool to do it out in the forest, but I just got to get this done. And instead, seeing the way that our professors approached the things we were learning about and the reverence with which they approached the place where we were staying, the lake that we were staying at, whenever we would go on trips, their excitement and their passion really bled into the students as well. And I remember one of our profs, Tim Van Deelen, he taught the wildlife class. So I had very minimal interactions with him, but I still saw him. And we were going to Lake Michigan, and Brian, the director, sort of came and explained what we'd be doing the next day. He said, okay, we're going to go up to Lake Michigan and maybe bring a swimsuit. It'll be cold, so you don't have to. We're going to eat some lunch. Very like boom, boom, boom. Here's what's going. And as everyone was leaving, Tim stood up on a chair and was like, hold on a second, and proceeded to explain to us that Lake Michigan was not somewhere where you could just walk up and say, oh, we're here for a little bit and walk away. He was like, Lake Michigan is a sacred, beautiful place. It's a holy place. Bring your suit. You're going to swim. Like, bring your camera. Like, come expecting to be excited and be changed by what you find there. And that will stick with me for the rest of my life, because I don't think very often, I don't think modern society or even modern Christians look at things very often anymore and designate them as holy or sacred places, holy or sacred things in their lives. And I think that that's something that's extremely important, especially as earthkeepers, as earth caretakers, that if we're in this vocation coming from a Christian perspective, we need to be looking at these things as sacred and holy because God put them there. And it sort of added this gravity and this reverence to what I was doing and what I'm wanting to do with my career.
Do you feel, Sarah, to follow up on that, that there's any tension between, say, what the sciences are teaching you in terms of what it means to be someone who cares for the environment, and seeing the sacred of creation at the same time? How do you reconcile those two things? The scientific approach, perhaps, and then the spiritual perspective?
For me, I view them as hand in hand. I see science as a way for us to get even the slightest glimpse into the intricacies that God created the world with. And the further in you go, the more intricate it gets. I just find myself more and more convinced that it couldn't be anything but a creator that put these beautiful things together in such perfect balance. And even in the scientific, there are ways to see that holiness and that reverence and see where God's hand was. Because again, I just look at it and I think there is no other way that this could function so perfectly and so beautifully.
We had a guest, Jeff Johnson, who was a musician, and he kind of echoed that same theme. He saw the sort of encounters with creation as art appreciation, really. That the more you pay attention, the more of the beauty and complexity and creativity you see. But it takes that intentional shift of perspective. And as you pointed out, I think we don't really get taught that often enough to really shift our perspective to see beyond the surface, say, of a given site or a lake or what have you. Carson, what about you? Talk about your experience and maybe some of the things that you took away from your Au Sable time.
For me, like I said before, I had the wildlife and fish ecology classes, and unlike Sarah's classes, both of those were very much focused on spending as much time out in the field as we could and interacting with different things. For wildlife, we did a lot of hikes. We visited a lot of forested places. We did a project using game cameras to get footage of wildlife. And then for fish ecology, we did a lot of work actually going and collecting data from different water sources, whether it was a stream or different ponds or a lake. And really getting down and getting my hands dirty was probably one of the biggest blessings for being there. And the reasoning for that is, being a student, we spend so much of our time with our head in a book or writing down notes in a lecture. And we have a tendency to just file all that information away as something we pull out on an exam later. And it becomes head knowledge, and it doesn't really affect us at our heart, where spiritual matters happen. And for me, I had experience as well. It was also with Tim Van Deelen on one of our wildlife trips. We were just hiking around a place called Hartwick Pines State Forest. It's one of the few actually old growth forests up in Michigan left because of how heavy the lumber business was back, a century or so ago. And to be able to go there and see how big some of the trees actually could get if it wasn't for being bothered by humans. Seeing the really big, like, white pines and American beeches compared to little shoots of maple trees that were all over the place, it was just breathtaking. I'm sitting there trying to take pictures with my phone, and then I'm like, this is useless. Like, I can't, doesn't look the same. So put my phone away and just tried to soak it all in. And one of the things that really stuck with me on that trip that is not going to leave me is when we were walking through and Tim was like, pointed out how the American beaches were almost all dead because of a fungus that is spreading throughout the U.S. and killing the beach populations. And obviously I'd seen an American beach before and some other classes. And he pointed that out, and he was like, in 20 years, or roughly 20 years, they've all died from this place. And the rest of that was probably the second week we were at Au Sable. And the rest of my time, whether I was hiking on campus or out doing a field trip for fun or for classes, I always tried to find the beech trees. And whenever I could find a beech tree that didn't have the telltale spots on its bark from the fungus, I was like, this is great. Like, they're still here. And just the translation of problems like that from writing on your notepad, oh, there's a fungus that's killing beech trees, to going to the forest and experiencing the viewpoint of someone who's seen them go. And imagine, what's that going to be like if they all go? If it's like, we have situations with animals like tigers where most of them you have to be in an artificial environment to see one alive. What if we get to the point with those trees? So whenever I see a beech tree now, it really takes me back, and you feel it in your gut, and you're like, this is a big deal and people need to know. So that was one of many things that, it doesn't stay in your head. Obviously it's a head thing too. You bring it up on an exam if that's what a question is asked, but becomes a heart thing. I have a duty to do what I can to use science as a tool to learn how this thing works and ways to possibly combat it, slow it down, whatever it may be, because, we're here to protect what's there, and science is one of the main ways for us to do it. So I think we got to make it a heart issue, not a head issue.
Yeah, I want to follow up on the heart issue comment because, as you described for us that encounter with beech trees and your recognition of a healthy beech tree in particular, there seemed to be something relational about that response in you, that it wasn't just an observation, but it was a recognition almost of someone you were glad to see, someone you cared for. Am I reading into it?
Yeah, it's something. I could explain it in that way. But we're like it with pets. Most people have pets of some sort, and we're gone for a while and we come back and we're like, oh, it's good to see you. We have that relationship there. And back home, we've got some pine trees back home, and when I moved there, they were pretty small, and now they've gotten a lot bigger. And I'm like, oh, like, you've gotten bigger this past couple of years. And yeah, you have that connection with it, and part of that connection is one of familiarity and the examples of most people's pets. But just one of the things Au Sable really brought out is the reminder that we were created by God for a purpose. These things were also created by the same God for maybe a different purpose, but we're connected because we have the same creator. And so I can look at, a beech tree and be like, we've got that in common. God both put us here for a reason. And, obviously we have different reasons and different purposes, but there is a connection there that just comes from knowing where we both came from, and that there's a greater reason for why we're there, even if it's something we don't understand.
I have a friend who is part of the Native American culture here in North America, and she has taught me to think in terms of the word kingdom, like Kindom, rather than kingdom of God. When you use that phrase kingdom, you're acknowledging, I think, that relationship that you're talking about, that we're all created, we're all part of creation, and that links us in a family sort of way and gives us a relationship that goes beyond the utilitarian. So I'm wondering if that's been your experience in nature and or of the Au Sable program.
Yeah, that idea of having a relationship to nature is a newer concept for me. Kind of as I mentioned previously, like growing up and through a lot of my like young adulthood, I didn't go camping. I didn't have a lot of wild areas that I went to. I grew up in the suburbs and I just didn't have a lot of those experiences. And so I had an appreciation for the nature that I got to see on TV or read about in books or saw in pictures, but I didn't have that personal connection to it. At Au Sable, I remember it was after our last Vespers. I remember thinking to myself, I have only been here for 4 weeks and I'm already taking my place for granted. And I was struck by that realization that, you know, in a week, I wasn't going to be able to wake up and see a forest outside my window and walk barefoot on trails to the dining hall, or, you know, hear squirrels barking in the trees or see birds fly by. I wasn't going back to that. And I had already reached a point where it was just normal and I wasn't appreciating it. I wasn't very happy with myself when I realized that. And I went down to Louis Pond, which is sort of a smaller pond that's right inside the entrance to Au Sable. And it's beautiful. There's trees surrounding it. There's lots of fish. There's lily pads, and there's this old dock. And I walked down and I sat, and I had appreciated nature before and seen the beauty of it as, like, you know, someone looking at a picture would, or someone looking at like a video would. But I sat there and I finally had that emotional connection of seeing God in the place where I was, seeing each tree and thinking like that was molded by the hand of God. Every lily pad, every damselfly, every caddisfly, every fish in that pond, like God knows. And like the massiveness of it struck me, and the appreciation of the creator God struck me. And it created that sense of kinship that you were talking about, that I was created by the Father, and so was every single thing that I was looking at was also created by the Father. And in that, like, we all have a purpose and we all have a reason for being where we are. And that was just something that really hit home while I was sitting there.
Do you think that perspective makes any difference to the way you would go about following your vocation, doing the kinds of jobs that you dream of doing one day?
Absolutely. I think passion and excitement for learning can take you so far. Passion is a great way to get started, but it has to be followed with purpose. And I think finding a purpose for doing something that will outlast the seasons of your life, there are very few things that can give you that. And I think we're so, I guess, blessed that we have a creator that gives us purpose and gives us purpose in our vocation. That goes back to Genesis, specifically for, like, you could look specifically at environmental work, creation work, but in business, engineering, art, there's purpose in that we are glorifying God and we are continuing and maintaining his creation, which for me makes a world of difference when I'm approaching, how do I write this paper? How do I approach this research project? Is this something I'm just going to kind of curve around and say, oh, this isn't important, or I don't have time for this? Or is it something I'm going to be able to approach and work for the Lord's purpose and find a way to learn, find a way to appreciate and have that purpose for the work that I'm doing?
Well, it sounds like it's really a matter of significance. I mean, the work that you do takes on a huge new significance when you view creation in those ways. Carson, do you find that's also true for you, that having that different, more intentional and relational perspective on the environment might affect your work in the future?
Yeah, 100%. already has affected why I even want to go into my job in the first place. In Genesis, God says to care for it and protect it. For me, I grew up in a town of 3,500 people. I don't like cities. When I'm out in the woods and it's just quiet and, I can't hear or see anything related to a human other than myself, it's where I feel God the most. And that's where it really becomes personal. And to be able to go out there and do whatever my vocation might be, I might do something completely different than what I'm planning on right now. But being able to see God in wherever I'm at, whatever I'm interacting with, whoever I may be interacting with, that's really the main reason for me. If God's given me the purpose, then I know that he's going to sustain me to carry it through, because I'm going to have bad days. That's just going to happen. So it's a good thing it's not all in my hands.
Yeah, for sure. I don't know if you're comfortable speaking in generalities, but if you were to kind of give me a read on your generation, where does the environment fit in terms of people's concerns and priorities as they look to the future? What do you think, Sarah?
I think that this generation is definitely more aware of it. It's something we've sort of heard a lot about growing up. Like in our formative years, there was, the hole in the ozone, and everyone worried about that. And we heard about that and got worried about that. And now we've got, carbon emissions and landfills and oil spills, and the news shows us so much of just problem after problem after problem. And I think while our generation is definitely more aware of it, I think there are sort of two responses that are being seen. I think there are some who see these issues and they are empowered and have like a call to action. They change their lifestyle. They change the choices that they make. But I also think that there is a portion of our generation that has seen so much of this destruction that they're numb to it, that they're seeing it as, well, this is such a huge problem, we can't do anything about it. What effect am I going to have? Oh, it's just another day in the world that we live in.
Carson, how about you?
Concerning, my generation, one of the biggest issues that I've seen in particular is detachment from nature due to the technological advancements that we have at our fingertips, specifically for the younger generation, people my age and a lot younger than me. So much is at our fingertips now because of technology that we tend to spend, all of us at some point or another, we spend our time in our heads down and looking at our phones. That's caused a lot of problems with my generation. And I think, to fix that, we just need to encourage people to go outside, go out and do stuff, I think it's one of those things, there's not really a cure other than to go experience it. I think that's the best we can do at this point. And when people really start to experience it is when they're really going to start to feel for it and develop that a spiritual and personal connection with it. And that's one of the things that Au Sable does really well. And for people who maybe haven't had the best chance to go outdoors and experience things like that, Au Sable forces you to spend as much time outside as you can. And I think that would be good for some people. And for people like me who enjoy it already, it's amazing. It's just another great blessing from him.
Sarah, you talked about the two responses that people in your generation seem to have. On the one hand, it's maybe despair or at least numbness and giving up. And you also noted that some of your generation also finds inspiration in the mission of trying to make things different. Do you find that that's true of other generations that you interact with? I mean, when you go home, for example, how do the people in your community think about what you do?
I think one of the biggest frustrations that I've had, especially like when I go home and I'm back with my church community and I'm back with that aspect of my life, it's frustrating sometimes because I will talk about the things I've learned at school or the topics that I'm learning about. And people in my church community are not always the most supportive of it. I'll be talking about something I learned in class that was very exciting, and I've had people who are disapproving or disagree because of talking about climate change or talking about overforestation or talking about what I would consider a misuse of resources. They see as God put these resources here for us. Humanity isn't strong enough or powerful enough to subvert what God has put here for us. Like, oh, we're not going to run out of this, or this isn't going to happen. For me, I see it as God put these things here for us, and they hold this intrinsic value of being created by God. And so it's our responsibility to care for it, to respect it. And they sort of have a more utilitarian view of it. I think there's a lot of room for the church to become more connected to this issue. And I especially think in the future of the church, as these become more pressing concerns, it'd be beneficial for it to be a pressing concern for the church. There needs to be a reunification between the church and God's creation.
Yeah. You know, when you look forward, how hopeful are you when you think about all the problems we're facing, you know, with climate change and even environmental justice? Do you have hope?
I think there is hope because of one of the benefits of, you know, all the technology we've got going on, and so news spreads a lot more. And I think a lot more people are aware now of the impacts that maybe a more utilitarian view of the environment has had on the environment itself, on, you know, extinction of animal or plant species and the degradation of whether it's natural resources or bulldozing forests to build parking lots, you know, whatever it is. I think we've had the opportunity to reach more people with that problem. So I think knowledge is growing. I also think that the advancements in science have really, a lot of effort has been put, at least from what I can see, especially in the past decade, to what we're doing to the environment. So I really think on that side, you know, there's a lot of positive things. There's also some things that are discouraging. For me, one thing that I was kind of emphasized, not necessarily emphasized, but was a big takeaway for me from the classes I took at Au Sable, is we just have a big problem of public ignorance. Even though all the information is at their fingertips, a lot of people don't know either what the specific issues are, or that there is an issue, or what they can do about it. So, you know, I have hope. Is there problems? Yeah, but there's a lot that we've done in the past to get to where we are now to actually affect things, whether it's changing how we live as a country or even as an individual, starting small. But, you know, I also think we have ultimate hope, knowing that God's still in control. We serve a sovereign God, and whatever he's got planned is going to happen. We just have to play our part. But we know beyond the shadow of a doubt that God doesn't want his creation being destroyed. And so we can be confident in the fact that when we're doing our best to protect and care for what he's given us to enjoy here on this earth, we know that we're going to be walking in his will. How we go about it might be a little different, but hopefully we're walking in that.
Yeah. What about you, Sarah? Are you hopeful as you look to the future?
I have hope. Otherwise, I wouldn't be, learning the things I'm learning or pursuing the career that I'm pursuing. I think in the world that we live today, especially in America, this is an issue that is very charged. There's a lot of opinions, and there's a lot of big opinions. I have hope in the visibility that the issues that our world is facing, it's been increased so much over the years. I have hope that our generation, the generations after us, are going to be more aware. Like Carson said, a huge issue is ignorance or misinformation or not knowing how to approach it. There is that temptation to have despair, to decide that there's nothing that you can do about it. But as Christians, we have to believe, and we do believe, that God works through anything and God can work through everything. And our small actions that might not seem to make a big difference, that might not seem to change anything, could have rippling effects that we're not even aware of.
Absolutely.
So I'm sort of the mindset of, I'm not going to say that I don't have hope, because that would be to say, like, I don't believe that God can change it. And I do believe that God can change it. Sometimes I do doubt. Sometimes I wonder, like, God, did you know what you were doing when you set all this in motion? Like, did you think this through? But I do believe in a sovereign God, and I believe that God has a perfect plan.
We've been in conversation with Jon, Sarah, and Carson about the life-changing work that Au Sable Institute does with college students whose vocational interests lie in creation care. For more information about Au Sable and about Pacific Rim Institute, check out this episode's show notes on the Earthkeepers website. The Earthkeepers podcast is an expression of Circlewood, an organization committed to cultivating a more ecologically conscious faith. For more information about the podcast, or to learn about the ways you can support this work, go to our website at earthkeepers.online. You can contact us by leaving a voicemail through the podcast website, or by emailing us at earthkeepers@circlewood.online. I am Forrest Inslee, your podcast host. James Amadon is our executive producer. Our content editor and researcher is Colleen Meggerly, and our sound engineer is Dave Wolfers. Jesselyn Gentry is our social media director, and Forrest Reed is the composer of our original music. Thank you for listening, friends, and please join us for our next conversation on the Earthkeepers podcast.